Thank you for joining us today for our seminar in the Journey to Science series at Onondaga Community College. This seminar is sponsored by the Bridges to Baccalaureate grant. Today, we're welcoming Carlos Castaneda, an associate professor of biology and chemistry from right in town, Syracuse University. He has a sort of interesting history. He was dropped off for his first day of kindergarten, not knowing a single word of English, and then went on to earn a bachelor's degree in chemistry and math, and later on a doctorate in biophysics from Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Castaneda will share, he'll fill in some of the details of how that journey came to be, and at the end he will also present an opportunity for internships for OCC students at Syracuse University. As you're watching, if you have any questions at all for Dr. Castaneda, there's a Q&A button at the top. Hit the button, type in your question, and we'll have him answer all of those at the end. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your story with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that really kind introduction. I hope everyone can hear me and hear me clearly and whatnot. What I'm planning to do today is to tell you about my story, how I got through kindergarten here, and then how I managed to get into this job that I have had for the last 7 years. It's been really fun. I think a lot of life events have occurred to me that has taught me a lot, and so I'm hoping to share some of those experiences with you today. And so maybe I should start by thinking about my own situation when I was growing up. So, and it's been a while since I've thought about this, but I think it's a good reflective moment for me. But so I'm an only child, and you can hear that I'm talking to you in English right now, with probably not much of an accent. But when I was born in Philadelphia, so not too far from here. I was born into a family, my mom and dad, who only spoke Spanish at the time. And so my first language is actually Spanish. So my parents are originally from Peru. They came to the States on a whim back during the days when it was a little bit easier to get green cards to come to the US. So they, I remember my mom entered this lottery system, and so she was one of the lucky ones that was able to get a green card. So she came here, and my dad was interested in being a doctor. And so he went to Philadelphia to go to medical school in Philadelphia for a time. But then they got back together. My parents were actually on opposite ends of the US coast at the time. They came into Philadelphia, and then they had me. But again, like, I was born into this family where I only spoke Spanish up for the first 5 years of my life. I didn't go through preschool the traditional way, and I started kindergarten. And I was popped into a room with like 15 other kids, and I knew no English. I distinctly remember that experience. I also remember how difficult it was for me to go to sleep during nap time when I was there in kindergarten. It was something I never quite understood, why people had to go to sleep during nap time. But anyway, so I'm just trying to put this into perspective for you, because it was this whole idea about like what I'm doing today I didn't even occur to me. I didn't even really know about this. My parents didn't know about this career path at all. Like I told you, my dad was really interested in wanting to be a doctor. My mom was interested in being a teacher. I guess I've inherited a little bit of stuff from both of them. But I was born into this family, right? It was just the three of us that lived in the States. And for the first 7-8 years of my life, I was pretty isolated. I think I stayed in my little neighborhood in Philadelphia, and it was hard. It was hard because I was still learning how to speak English and just learning how to make friends. My dad was always quite busy, so he was busy at being at medical school and then his internship and whatnot. And my mom was the one who took me around to various places, and so that's how I got my introduction into the world. It was challenging. It was really difficult for me in the very beginning, and I even remember when I started grade school, elementary school, that my teachers were commenting on how you know, like he's not reading, or like he doesn't understand like what the teachers are telling him and things like that. But I remember my mom always tells the story. My first grade teacher realized that I really liked math, and they used to have like contests, like to see how quickly kids could add numbers together or do multiplication, things like that. And I would always come in first when I was doing that. So very early on, I think my teachers, my mom especially, recognized that there was something different about how I liked thinking about math. And so, like, you know, time went on. I started learning more English, obviously, because, you know, being here. My parents, my dad was very particular about that. It was a really interesting experience because my dad, as soon as he realized that, like, oh, he's not speaking English at school, they switched me at home into just speaking nothing but English. And so I went through that for a couple of years, and now I think that's part of the reason why, like, I don't have that much of a Spanish accent anymore. I can still talk in Spanish, but it's not something I do as much as I used to. But again, like, my extended family is still in Peru, not really here, and so it's still always been just my mom, my dad, and me. So fast forward, so going through high school a little bit, going to about high school. You know, like, I was living life as a kid in this neighborhood in Philadelphia. Started to have friends here and there. Really like playing tennis and really like biking and things like that. And I got to this point where I was finishing grade school, and my parents, they started going through a separation. Eventually they got divorced. And I was kind of popped into this situation right at this in between of grade school and high school. So I was about 13 at the time, and my parents separated, and I ended up living just with my mom. And I realized that all of a sudden I had to grow up, like, really instantaneously. And that was a really hard thing. I didn't really know what that meant at the age of 13. And I also struggled because I was switching schools, starting high school. And I ended up realizing that I needed to make new friends. But at the same time, like, I was here, I was still in Philadelphia, had gone to a high school that wasn't too far from where we lived. It's maybe like, you know, 5-10 minute drive away. And the reason why I'm saying all this is that, like, in high school, I realized that I needed to learn more about math and science and things, because I started to realize that I liked it. But I also realized that, like, my home life was a kind of a bit of a mess. But these factors kind of played a really important aspect as to how I grew up. So in 9th grade, I had a really amazing English teacher. He was a teacher that really just pushed me to learn how to write paragraphs. I distinctly remember in high school, in this 9th grade English class, we were reading Shakespeare, and so he had us read passages in Julius Caesar, and we would have to, like, analyze the passage and, like, talk about, you know, what symbols are here, what kind of events are happening here. Oh man, but he was tough. He kind of turned into this father figure for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but he really pushed me and taught me, like, how to read and how to really analyze something and how to write. And I'm so grateful for that, looking back on it now, because I realize so much of my job today is writing and reading and looking at literature really critically. And he, I think, was the first person that made me see that. But you don't think about this, right? I mean, in English literature class, how can that possibly relate to science, to biology, to chemistry, to physics? But I will tell you, and you can ask this question too in the Q&A at some point, it plays such a big role. So that's sort of built like one of the pillars, I guess, for me, and that kind of continued on through all of high school. The other thing that happened during high school for me that I think is critical to how I got to where I am is I ended up befriending one of my best friends now. We've still been best friends since high school. So I guess now that's been over 25 years at this point, which is also weird to say. And my friend, his dad was a chemist, and I had no idea what that meant, that his dad was a chemist. But I got to know my friend really, really well over the years in high school. And my friend, he had a really tough time also growing up. He too was a first-generation American. His family was a lot larger than mine, so he had brothers and sisters. I was so jealous of him. I really didn't know at the time that I really had wanted to have more people around me, because I always felt, I guess, isolated, right, alone. Not many people that I could talk to, and it's hard, right? I think we all live through different life experiences, and some things happen that you don't know why they happen, but they do. And meeting my best friend is like one of those events that just it kept on occurring. There was always like a thing that ended up happening where we would always find a way to hang out together. And so like I got to know him, I got to know his family, especially his dad. And I was saying, like, right, he had a hard time growing up. He's first generation American also. His parents were poor, so it was very difficult for him to even come to the high school that I was at. So I went to a private high school in Philadelphia. So you can imagine it's not exactly cheap. It's a lot cheaper than it is today now. But my friend, they were excited to have him there for the first year, but they were really not sure whether he would be able to stay beyond his first year because it was expensive. And so my best friend, he ended up taking up quite a lot of extra jobs along the side. And I was just watching this happen, and I was watching how his dad was, struggling, right, just to keep his own job as a chemist. But it made such again, like one of these major impacts on my own way of being and on my own life. He was the happiest person I knew. His dad was always excited to come to pick up his son and to see me. I remember my mom also told me the story where they would sometimes come early to school to pick us up. And my best friend's dad would always go over to my mom and chat. He had been through a lot in his own life. So he was originally, he grew up in Ukraine during the, when it was still part of the Soviet Union. And then they came to the States in the 80s. And then he's also been traveling to different parts of the world, like Brazil and things like that. So he had a lot of cool experiences, and he would always chat with my mom, and that's, I think, how we started to become even better friends. It's really sad to say he passed away last year. He passed away because of COVID. He was one of the first people in Philly to get diagnosed with COVID. We didn't know it at the time. And so he passed away at the very end of March of last year. But I'm telling you this because he was one of those role models for me that I didn't know at the time until I looked back. But his role in chemistry, his interest in like always wanted to explain how everything worked was something that his son, my best friend, picked up. And I think I learned that through high school, how fun it was to kind of learn how things worked. I used to love playing with Legos when I was little. And so I always had this idea of, you know, trying to understand how proteins worked in the context of how you put Lego bricks together. And I have 3 kids right now, and just watching them, how they are today, and you know, they're playing with their own Legos. In fact, they're playing with the very same Legos that my parents used to buy me. So these are 35-year-old Lego pieces that are still very well kept, and they're still playing with them now. But it's just fun to watch how they're putting things together. And I think that's like the second pillar for me for what kind of got me to where I am, right? So I was talking about writing, and I was talking about this interest in putting things together and explaining how things worked in chemistry. And then a funny thing happened. In senior year, I got called into the principal's office at the very, actually, like I think it was the day before the school year was supposed to begin. So that was a really unusual phone call I remember getting. It's like, what did I do? And what had happened was we were putting together my class schedule for senior year, for my last year in high school. And at the time, I was really interested in computers. I really like computers, and this sort of makes sense, right? With thinking about Legos and stuff like that. So I thought, like, you know, I'd be taking computer classes. But my principal told me at that time that I had this gap in my schedule. And that gap in the schedule was for a chemistry class. And well, it was a gap, but then he suggested I take a chemistry class to fill that gap, because he didn't want me to have the first and second periods be free. Because I think at that point, right, you're in high school, you get to school, you know, like around 8 o'clock in the morning, and if you have nothing to do until like 9:30, not something that looks really favorable, right? It's almost like you're going to get into trouble or something. So they wanted to fill up my schedule. So they filled up my schedule, and I ended up having a chemistry teacher. I remember her name, Mrs. Panesiak. Yeah. She was also one of those people I didn't realize at the time, but that would make a really big impact in my life. She taught us chemistry in a way that I just really liked. And I think it was because she taught it in a way that really used math. It was really quantitative, and we did a lot of calculations. We were calculating, you know, concentrations of stuff, calculating the moles of something, right? How do you make a buffer this way? And I don't know, I think I just realized at that point that I really liked her approach, her teaching ways. And so those things brought me to thinking about chemistry as a path for me, just in the terms of like, oh, I liked chemistry as a science. I liked thinking about calculations. I liked thinking about mixing stuff and seeing how they react to make something else happen. So that happened, and senior year went by, and I started college after that. My life events happened during that time too, right? I was telling you how my parents separated and got divorced. For reasons that I had to kind of stay closer to home, I ended up going to school, to college in Philadelphia. So I stayed very local, but I tried to make it a point so that I could live at school. But I stayed very close to home so that I could go back and visit my mom. Things happened, like my grandmother at the time was sick, and so my mom was flying back to Peru, quite a few times during my senior year of high school, and also kind of going into the beginning of my college time, because my uncle wasn't doing well either. And again, like my entire family was in Peru. So I often was kind of left here by myself. And I wanted to kind of stay close to home to look after my mom's house, or sometimes my dad's house. Because at that point, like I was learning how to drive a car and stuff like that. So you can kind of imagine, like there was a lot of stuff that was put on me, and I didn't really realize that it was a lot until just going through life events and just realizing. Same thing happened to my best friend. There were reasons that he needed to stay home closer to his family in Philadelphia. So the two of us went to college together. And we ended up being roommates for all 4 years of college. We were roommates in the dorms, and then we ended up being housemates when we got a place to live sort of off campus. And yeah, it was an interesting time because I think we both realized that we had difficulties of stuff that we were going through with our families. And we stayed really close. We continue to stay close today, although he's far away in Boston and I'm here in Syracuse. But we ended up taking a lot of classes together in chemistry. He is one of those craziest chemistry lab partners. He would we would go into lab together, and you know how like sometimes you have a teacher that'll tell you at the beginning of your lab report, or not lab report, but your assignment, there are certain things you should not do. Like for example, don't turn on the gas line unless you have tubing connected to a Bunsen burner, right? Yeah, so my best friend at the time, right, he didn't really listen to that. And so I still distinctly remember one time he just thought, I wonder what would happen if I just opened the gas line right here and I just lit it there. And so he did. And so, boom, you can imagine this flame coming out of that gas thing. He very quickly shut it off. I don't even think our teacher noticed it. But it kind of gives you an idea of the kind of chaos that the two of us would typically get into when we were in lab together. And it was really good for me because I really learned how to have fun, sometimes in a not so safe way. So I sometimes I look back on it and I wonder, it's a miracle that none of us got hurt, because some of the things that I think we did could have easily, caused the fire alarm to go off, or evacuate the building or something like that. But I'm really grateful that we had those experiences. But it was in these classes, it was actually in that class that I had a really good, another really good professor that taught us organic chemistry. I distinctly remember him. And he was one of the people that taught me about opportunities in research, because I had no idea what that was and what that meant. I don't know what research was. I knew, like, for instance, you could be a doctor because my dad was a doctor. Knew that you could be a teacher. I didn't know what it meant to be a scientist. But he, my organic chem professor, he was a scientist, and he had done, he had gone to Portugal for a research experience back when I think he was in graduate school. And actually, no, maybe when he was after he finished graduate school. And so he was teaching us all those things. And I realized, talking to my best friend's dad, who was a chemist, that that's sort of what his job was like too. He worked for Merck during that time when we were in college together, and he did a lot of this research, right? They were trying to design drugs to combat or to inhibit certain kind of interactions between two protein molecules. And I didn't know at the time what that meant. You know, going through college, you kind of just go through, sometimes you go through the rhythms of things, right? You kind of just go through class to class, and you know, many other things happen to you during college that can distract you. It's certainly what happened to me. I'll get into that. And he would teach us about, he would tell us a little bit about his research experiences. And so this would end up being a big thing for me, because like by the time I finished college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought that maybe going into a research lab setting would help, would maybe teach me a little bit about what I want to do with my life. So we went to a couple of different places in Philadelphia where, you know, they had different research labs and things like that. I also ended up staying at LaSalle. That was my college in Philadelphia. LaSalle University it's in this not such a super great neighborhood in North Philadelphia, and we would still take a lot of trips downtown where we would learn about some of these research labs and stuff. And I one time stayed at LaSalle over the summer just to kind of see what it was like to maybe learn how to do research in a lab at LaSalle. But I didn't know what this meant. I was a senior at that point, and it's very different than how things are today. Like today, a lot of the students that come through SU, they already know that they want to do research, and they already are looking for labs here, for example, like to learn how to do research. I didn't know what any of this meant until after I was pretty much done with college. So that's what ended up making me decide to take a year between college and graduate school. I wasn't sure what to do with my life. I ended up thinking that I should go to graduate school to kind of learn about how proteins worked. But I also didn't know what graduate school was. So I ended up working for a year in Philadelphia. And that helped. So I ended up working as a research lab technician. I had no idea what that meant. I applied for the job, I remember, on monsters.com or monster.com. It's like one of those job search websites. And I remember just looking, I don't know, trying to find like a thing to do. And I found this job opportunity there. And so like I thought that I could work there for a year or two while I tried to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. This is where my life with my best friend kind of diverged. And what happened was my best friend, he decided to go to graduate school right away. He knew what he wanted, mainly again because of his dad. His dad was a chemist, right? He's like, okay, I think you should go to graduate school. You like doing this stuff. You should learn how to do this. I didn't know what that meant. So I stayed in Philadelphia. I worked in this lab for a year. And that was when I really got to enjoy thinking about science. It was tough. I was 21 years old. I had to rent my own apartment because at that point my mom didn't want me living at home anymore because I was an adult. And got my own apartment. Ended up taking the train. All right, I was commuting downtown to Philadelphia, trying to maintain a regular schedule. It was hard. And I also remember my first day when I worked there, I was like, here's this protocol I wanted to do. I'll see you in a week. It was scary because I had no idea what that meant. I learned at that point that I needed to talk to people more. I needed to talk to the people in that lab a little bit more. And it made a big impact because I realized I needed to be organized. I needed to be clear about what I was doing. But really important for me is I needed to talk to people. I really needed to spend time reading. I needed to spend time talking to people. And then I can start doing stuff in the lab. So I was there for about a year. I thought I should think about graduate school because I realized all of the people that worked in the lab learned a lot of the science that they did because they went to graduate school. And graduate school is this time period. I don't know if some of you know, but it's think of it as like an extension of more schooling. You kind of get trained, right, in a more specialized area. For me, it was biochemistry because I really liked playing with proteins and playing with molecules and trying to figure out how things worked. And what would happen for me is I wanted to kind of see where I wanted to go, what part of the country I wanted to be in. And so I ended up applying to a bunch of different graduate schools throughout the country. And I was really happy that I ended up in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins. And Baltimore itself is, I remember being told many times, why do you want to go to Baltimore, of all places? Baltimore is a rough and tumble kind of place, depending on where you live. But I really am grateful for having lived there because I think I had a lot of experiences in Baltimore that taught me, again, how things can be rough. We lived in a neighborhood that was not so bad, but commuting from that neighborhood sometimes to a medical school campus, you can see a lot of bad things along the way. But again, I lived there for about 6 years, 7 years. But it was like one of the fun times of my life. I really enjoyed getting to do research and getting to know people down there, and getting to kind of see what labs were like. I kind of realized at this time, but of my life, that I wasn't really sure what I was going to do after graduate school, though. So there's another person in my life at that point that really mattered, and that was my advisor. So my graduate advisor, his name is Bertrand Garcia Moreno. He's originally from Mexico, and he'd also been through a lot in his life. I remember he told me stories when he was in the Mexican army when he was 18, because you have to be in the army no matter what if you grow up in Mexico. He came to the States later, right? And he started college in the States. And so then he started his lab, 10 years after that, because again, he was really excited about science. But he was an amazing role model. He had this knack for also being like one of the kindest people that I ever talked to. He would always come by lab and check up on every single one of us. And he also was that kind of parent figure for many of us. We could come to him whenever we had issues. And I had lots of issues during graduate school. I went through a lot of relationships with people, some of which were hurtful. I know people at the time who really went through negative experiences in graduate school. I also realized that graduate school taught me a lot about myself that I didn't want to know. It was a period of my life that I'm really happy that I went through, because I think it made me a stronger person in retrospect. So what happened was I had some good friends. Some of those friends got sick, either from diseases, or sometimes they got really depressed and they went through really difficult times. I distinctly remember spending a couple of times in the hospital with someone just because they, weren't doing very well. And, just trying to be there to listen to them. But I was watching all of this happen to me and talk to all these people, and I, again, just realized how difficult life is. At the same time, I always came back to science because I always felt like when I was in the lab, I was really happy. I always found like I could do something in the lab every day, and I really liked it. And it kind of made me realize that even though things around me were rough and not so easy, I could take some consolation in the fact that I could go to the lab and do an experiment and feel like I was accomplishing something, even though it might have been really tiny, right? It may not have been a big deal or life-altering kind of event for anybody, but just for me, just to kind of get the satisfaction of like, I can do this experiment and get some data out of it, and it was good. I learned at that time to run. Running was my way of de-stressing and dealing with all the stuff that was happening around me. I ended up realizing that going on a longer run on the weekend would really help me decompress. So I ended up training for half marathons. I trained for like a marathon that I finally eventually did in 2011. This was actually 4 years after graduate school. It wasn't super fast, but it was fun in that I did it back in Philadelphia. And why this is such a big deal had to do with the fact that between graduate school and right before I started here, I got married. And so I got married to another graduate student that I knew when I was at Hopkins. And we had a fantastic relationship. It was amazing. We met in graduate school, but a couple of years into that marriage, things fell apart very quickly. A lot of tough things happened in 2011 for me. So we initially got separated, right? My wife and I got separated at that point. We had been together at that point for like 5 years. The other thing that happened that was bad that year was that my dad, he had a quadruple heart bypass. So he went to the hospital. I remember getting a phone call one night in late March, and everything kind of just collapsed. It's one of those things when people say, like, when it rains, it pours. So I was in Baltimore. My postdoc was in College Park, Maryland. So you get this impression, I haven't gone super far, right? Philadelphia, Baltimore, College Park. The good thing about this part of the country, you can get from all these places by train very quickly, right? I was taking a train back and forth at that point in March of 2011 because, again, like, my mom was in Philadelphia, she was by herself, my dad was in the hospital, my parents are divorced, right? But my mom still cared about my dad. My dad definitely needed my mom. So that was a very difficult situation because my two parents did not get along very well. I had to go back to Philadelphia to take care of my dad. We had to eventually get help from Peru, from my dad's family, to help. But those set of events in 2011 set up this bad timing with my wife where everything kind of just like collapsed. And it was a lot of stress on both of us. So we separated. This was during the middle of my postdoc. The reason why I did my postdoc where I was because my wife at the time was still in graduate school. So like I found that I kind of restricted myself to this part of the country all because I was kind of stuck in this situation. And then I went through a lot of negative emotions at that time too, I remember. But I went through a lot, and it again taught me that I needed to grow up. I went running a lot in 2011. It was the way that I found that I could de-stress. And that's main reason why I ended up doing the Philly Marathon in 2011. I needed something that year to make things better for myself. I needed something to look forward to, and I found that running that marathon was just that. I also didn't know at the time but going through this stuff during that year made it really difficult, made it really challenging. But I realized that I could do a lot of things, and so I ended up being really productive at that point in my life, in my postdoc career. And I was writing papers, and we were putting together these reports and stuff. And so that's how I got to where I am. I set myself up for this this position, running this lab. So I've kind of meandered through my life, but I kind of told you a lot of things about how I got to where I am, the different things that have happened to me. One of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to kind of share a couple things with you about what we do in my lab and also some opportunities. So I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. I'm going to put this up. I think I need to do window. I don't know if people can see this part. Just let me know if everything looks okay. Yeah? Okay, good. No? Okay, good. Sweet. So some of you probably know biology, some of you kind of know the chemistry, but my lab studies something that's really important to my life now, which is stress. I've got 3 kids at home right now, ages 2, 3, and 5, with my new wife. My new wife and I, we got married in 2015, a year after I started my job here. It's funny how life events happen, because you end up meeting people that you don't realize are just going to change your life again. And I think everything in life happens for a reason. Anyway, so we study a lot of stress-related events that happen inside cells. That's my way of introducing this slide. And one of the things that we study, I don't know if you can see this. These are cells. These are actually a human cancer cell line. But I hope you can kind of see that there's a protein here that is changing how it looks in the cell. It looks like it's diffuse and going to like this puncta-like thing when you subject these cells to stress. We study this a lot now. This is really where I think a lot of our protein stuff matters. So we're really trying to understand how proteins kind of come together to form these stress granules, as they're called. And the reason why I'm talking to you about these stress granules, one, to show you that we do microscopy, another to show you that we care a lot about proteins, but another big reason is because I want to tell you that a lot of what we do is related to ALS. ALS is one of these diseases that we're really interested in. It's amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Some of you might remember the Ice Bucket Challenge from a few years back. But those stress granules that I was showing you on that first slide, they are related to ALS. We think that when those stress granules go wrong, that is one of the things that causes ALS to happen in people. And ALS is a disease where like you kind of get trapped into your own human body because you're stuck inside. You can't really move your muscles and stuff. And you eventually pass away because you can't control your breathing anymore. But your brain is completely intact and you can still think and see everything happen around you. We directly benefited from the Ice Bucket Challenge because this raised money. This raised research monies. And so we got money from that to run our research lab when I started here back in 2014 and 2015. I wanted to also show you a picture of our lab now. Some of you might know or might have heard Peter Raymond Smeedy last year. I don't know, maybe not. But he was somebody who went to OCC, and he is currently a graduate student in my lab right now. So he's a biology graduate student, actually going through his second year exams right now. So he just had his first part on this past Monday. So anyway, this is sort of what our lab looks like. You can kind of see that we have a lot of people. We've got postdocs, we've got graduate students, and we have a lot of undergraduates. The reason why I mentioned the undergraduate side is because we are really interested in having people come through our lab and learn about what research is. I told you that I didn't know what this was when I was in college, and so we'd like to really help with that. And since OCC and all of you are close, I think this might be a really cool way for you to kind of see what we do, and I can tell you more about the science and tell you more about my life experiences that got me here. There are several things that you can do to get interested or to tell me more. You can talk to me directly. I'm going to share my contact info with you guys. But there's also research programs for the summer or even for winter break. So there's a summer experience that the chemistry department here at SU does. And this is just last year's information sheet. But you notice that you can actually get money to do this experience, right? So you get $6,000 to be here for about 10 weeks, and you learn how to do research. You're part of a research project. You generally work with graduate students and other mentors and kind of get through that experience. It's really fun. We do this a lot, and some of our best students have come through this program. These are pictures of some of my former graduate students. Christine is now in industry. Jules has actually just started graduate school in Philadelphia, of all places, a year ago. And so they're doing well. They're next to their posters here. This is all they did for that one summer, right? So they learned from the beginning to the end how to put this project together, and we usually help with that process. I was telling you about the Ice Bucket Challenge. I also wanted to tell you too that if you're interested beyond, right, if you get really excited about doing science and doing research, you can think about graduate school. I'm in 2 departments here, so biology and chemistry, and this is one of our flyers for the bio department. So you can feel free to talk to me about this, and I can tell you more about the grad program as time goes on. I think that's it. I don't think I had anything. Oh, there is one more thing. I wanted to tell you very quickly, if you're interested, those of you that like biology and like art, we do a thing here at SU in the bio department with my colleague that's just next door to me, Dr. Henley. We have this bio art thing where we bring biologists and artists together to this setting. This is pre-COVID times, where they can just talk about their research or talk about their art and how they kind of are interlinked. And so it's a really fun way to outreach and to also just talk about science, but from different perspectives. From the artist's perspective, because as you can kind of tell, a lot of what I do now is microscopy based, and microscopy yields some really beautiful images. So I will send more information about this bio art thing, but anybody at OCC is totally welcome to come to these. Recently, these have been pretty much over Zoom, but we hope to have these things again in person on SU's campus. So I think that's it. I'm going to close this.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much for sharing your story. There's a couple of questions. They actually are both, the questions are related, and they both have to do with hindsight. Quite a few times you said that there was something important, but you didn't realize the true importance until much later, whether it was people or events. Now I can imagine at the time when those things were happening, it wasn't so clear, right? The future was not clear, the path was not clear, maybe even confusing or scary or concerning. What would you tell yourself, right? If you could talk to yourself in high school or college at one of those times where you were at sort of crossroads that you now realize were crossroads and there was confusion, what would you tell yourself if you could go back?
You know, that's a good question. I think I would probably tell myself that I need to just kind of live in that moment and kind of just reflect and let things happen and not to worry too much. My mom always used to tell me, and she still tells me today, like, don't overthink things. I'm an overthinker for sure, but just to kind of let things happen. I didn't realize, for instance, like my failed marriage, my failed first marriage, would get me to the point to where I am today. Like, I think it made a big deal for me. I think back then I was like, why did this happen to me? Why did I do something awful? And I think at that point you always want to kind of fix the problem, but sometimes you can't fix it. Sometimes you just have to let it evolve or let time just happen. So I think that's what I need to tell myself, is just to be patient, let time be like my guide to get this all going.
Very sage advice. I will try to apply that to my own uncertainties in life. Michael is wondering how to apply for these internship opportunities and when the due date is for the summer 22 internships.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the chemistry RU program, those deadlines are typically in February of the whatever year. So there will be one, I think February 15, 2022. It's probably going to be that deadline. It's not out yet, but I'll be happy to send that info along. There is another thing I want to mention too. For for instance, for my lab, like we've been talking to some people that we might try to host people during winter break. So for us, it's maybe like middle of January, where we can put people here in lab for like a week if you want to get some kind of experience on what it's like to work here. And we have like a little project that might be fun for people to learn during that time, where you can kind of get up and start it and finish it by the time that week goes on. So that's something we can talk directly.
Yeah, and that was somebody else's question. If there was any opportunities over winter break, keep an eye on your OCC email, and we will be advertising some opportunities as soon as we sort out what they will be and if there are any other labs at SU that would like to participate, but there definitely are opportunities. Another question is, someone asked if you could expand a little bit on what kinds of educational paths or career paths would open up through having some experience in a research lab.
Yeah, so I think you get openings for instance, thinking about industry. So thinking about working at a company, sometimes working as a research lab technician. There are many labs, even here in Syracuse, that are looking for people who have just gotten their bachelor degree, but just to help like run a lab, or even just have a small project or like maintain things. We're always looking for people in that kind of role. Other things that I think it also opens up, if you do research, you learn the science, you learn how to talk about it, and you can communicate about it. So I know some people who are really good science writers, and that's a really fun thing, where you can basically spend a lot of time reading and finding ways to communicate that science to people that don't really think about it. So I've noticed a couple of people really enjoy that route, going down the research path. Maybe my way of saying this is you really can do a lot of different things. I know people who also go and work, some kind of advisory role, like at the government level, whether it be local, state, or federal, just to talk about the science and help other people understand. I feel like today that's a really important skill, right? Just being able to explain things, like I do it with my own family. And that, I think, is another good experience with research. So I think it opens up a lot of different opportunities. And I'm happy to kind of explain this more, because I know this is only like a couple-minute explanation.
Yeah, all possible career options distilled into a 90-second dissertation. Certainly, if anybody who's watching has any more questions, feel free to get in touch with me. My name is all over the flyers, and I'm happy to pass any questions or interests on to Dr. Castaneda about his research and about these opportunities. And again, keep an eye on your email, and research opportunities and internship opportunities will show up there as well. Any parting words for our students?
Have fun, have lots of fun, and try your best to let things happen. Life is hard, as I've learned, but you can still kind of make it what you want it to be. I think you have control over that, and I know I've had to teach myself that a lot now. I've got 3 kids at home, 2, 3, and 5, right? Those are their ages. It's really chaotic, but at the same time, I think if there's anything I've learned from life, it's be very grateful that you've got yourself, your family, your health, whatever it be. All those things are very important.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much for taking this time out of your undoubtedly very, very busy professional and personal schedule. We really appreciate you talking to our students, and beyond that, opening up your lab for students to come in and experience what research is like. And like I said, keep an eye on your OCC email address, and we will let you know. There's a couple of names I wrote down from the questions as well, so look out for an email from me specifically to let you know how to go about exploring some of those opportunities. And there was one last question that asked about chemistry internships, and as you mentioned, you happen to also be located in the chemistry department.
Right.
So you're the double expert, biology and chemistry, so it sounds like, yes, there are chemistry opportunities available as well.
Yeah, there's lots of labs, both departments that are very interested, that are always looking for people. So chemistry has this RU program, biology, we have other avenues too, and I know there are other labs in our department that are interested in hosting people for short internships.
Perfect. So the common theme here is there are many opportunities. Please talk to us.
Yeah.
With that finishes up today's seminar. Thank you so much, Carlos, for taking the time, and join us again in October when we talk to some graduate students from Cornell. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.